welcome to another conversation. As you know, this program, the idea is to keep you better informed about things that are going on in and around the communities that we serve. Not to mention some of the items, whether it's local issues, maybe there's upcoming events. We are starting to drift into some of the political seasons, and the idea is to share conversations with you with candidates who are willing to stop by and chat with us. We are privileged today to speak with a gentleman who is a Republican gubernatorial candidate for governor. Well, I should have just said that, gubernatorial. He is Brian Shortsleeve, and he is here to give us some ideas about why he is running for governor. Welcome to the program.
Well, terrific to be here, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
You got it. For those who may or may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Brian Shortsleeve. I'm a father, I'm a Marine, I'm a businessman. I've spent most of the last 25 years of my life building businesses in the private sector. I also spent a little bit of time working in state government for Governor Baker back in 2015 and 16. But at core, I'm a Marine. It's really my experience as an officer in the Marine Corps that have defined who I am, how I think about things, how I approach problems. The core values of the Marine Corps are honor, courage, and commitment. Marines are taught to work together as teams to accomplish a mission. And I've been doing all that all my life. I think Massachusetts needs a rescue mission right now, and we can talk about that today.
Well, before I get started, thank you for your service. If you will, kind of give us some of the core messages and some of the themes of your campaign, and how do they contrast with the current administration right now that's in office?
Well, I've been in Massachusetts all my life, other than 4 years serving out in Southern California as a Marine. This is a great state. It's a state I love. It's a state I want to see grow and prosper. But unfortunately, under Maura Healey's failed policies, a lot of the key indicators in this state are going the wrong direction. We're losing 500 people a week walking out the door. We've got fewer people working in the private sector today than we did 3 years ago. Your utility bills are through the roof. Today is warm, by the way. 92 degrees out there. So keep an eye on that utility bill. It's going up. And I'll tell you why it's going up. It's going up because of all those state mandated fees that Maura Healey has jammed into your bill. So the result of those things, higher costs, higher fees, means people are leaving Massachusetts. Young people are leaving Massachusetts. We need to turn that all around. We need to make this a state that works for working families, a state that works for young people, that can retain young people. And my focus as governor, day one, will be to get the state growing again, get the private sector growing again, cut costs, cut utility bills, and make this a state that's on a growth trajectory.
There have been a couple of stories that have been resonating with folks in the Commonwealth over the past 6 to 8 months. Probably primarily it's the migrant crisis, the shelters, the funding that is being spent to maintain them. Give your take on this situation.
Well, look, what I would tell you there is it's completely off the rails. That is an example of Healey's failed leadership. And in fact, this is not leadership, it's insanity. The numbers that came out this week from Healey's administration said that we're on track to spend $1 billion in this fiscal year. We're 3 years into it. Cumulatively, that's probably $3 billion of direct expenditure on the migrant crisis so far. To put that in perspective, with that amount of money, you could give every city and town in the state $10 million of local aid that could support schools and could support police and could support fire. So when I look at that level of spend, I think we've got to remember that is an example of the shelter program being misused. That program was never intended to be used in the way that it is. It was intended for Massachusetts residents who are U.S. citizens. And we need to return to the basics on that program. What we've also learned through the auditor's audit on the migrant shelter report is that there's millions of dollars being wasted. In some cases, $6 million no-bid contracts for taxi companies out on Cape Cod that are charging the Commonwealth $100 per trip, hundreds of thousands of dollars in missed trip fees. There was one particular example I read about where taxpayers were charged $150 to transport a migrant 200 feet across a parking lot. That is an example of failed leadership. It's an example of sweetheart deals. It's an example of no-bid contracts. All that needs to end. Government needs to deliver better. And under Healey, what we've seen is just unrestrained spending and a great deal of taxpayer money being wasted.
If you are elected, how would you be an advocate to change the right to shelter law? And how would you balance humanitarian concerns for fiscal responsibility?
We're the only state in the country with a right to shelter law. And that's a law that was put in 1983 by Governor Dukakis. And it was focused on battered women. It was focused on families that were here that needed a basic transitional level of assistance. Right. It was never intended to absorb thousands and thousands of migrant families. And currently, the way it's being used, I would say was not its intent, right? That was intended for Massachusetts citizens that are U.S. or Massachusetts residents that are U.S. citizens. So I would return to the basics. We should give homeless veterans first priority. I'm a Marine. I care a lot about veterans. Right. I work with veterans. We should be giving preference to veterans, and we should get back to the basics. It's a program for Massachusetts residents and U.S. citizens.
You had mentioned in your previous answer in regards to if there's a way to take that spending for migrant shelters to give that to communities, we look and we see communities across the South Shore going for overrides. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that they would appreciate that extra funding in local aid. Let's talk a little bit about the budget, mm-hmm. the fiscal year budget. Right now it's in conference committee. I think what's the number somewhere? It was $62 billion. I think that's what they're talking about compared to the current fiscal year, which is about to end, which was 56, 57. Talk to me about, is this sustainable to keep spending and putting forth spending plans like this on an annual basis?
Well, the numbers are stunning, and I can tell you it's completely unsustainable. Right. Over the past 6 years, our state budget has grown by 50%, 50. In a state in which our population is not growing very quickly. And in fact, we've got more taxpayers and more businesses leaving than coming. So when I look at that level of spending growth, just in the last couple of years alone with Healy, we've seen her add $10 billion of spending, $4 billion this year alone. Where's that going to? It's going to $1 billion on the migrant shelter program, which, as we said, is riddled with corruption, riddled with wasted money. That's not fair to hard-paying taxpayers in this state that are working hard to support their families. It's not fair to working people and working families. This is an expensive state. We've got to get costs under control. We've got to cut taxes, we've got to cut utility bills, and we've got to get expenses down. Where do you start with that? You start with getting the state budget under control. As you said, the state budget is now $62 billion. Yeah. And I would ask you, is it getting back to your community? Do you see it in your schools? Is your fire department, your police department benefiting? And the answer is no. That money is ending up on Beacon Hill. It's being spent by Governor Healy on things like the migrant crisis. So we need to put a stop to that. We need to get that money back into local communities, because $7 to $10 million could wave off a lot of overrides and other things that are happening right now in local communities.
Well, let's talk about something else that's been in the news a lot. I know that recently the SJC handed down a ruling. There were a number of communities that were fighting against the MBTA Communities Act. I think Milton was one of them. Duxbury was one of them. Hanson, just to name a few. I know there's like 8 or 9. Give your thoughts as to this law. This is something that dates back to Governor Baker. Mm-hmm. It was kind of an initiative to try to jumpstart the housing stock. What's your thoughts on this and how it's being handled at this particular time?
I support a full repeal of the MBTA Communities Act. Okay. Here's why. It's an unfunded mandate. It's administrative overreach. It's a one-size-fits-all approach. In many cases, it's forcing small suburban towns to put hundreds or even thousands of units of multifamily housing into areas where they don't necessarily have the infrastructure to support it. Could be the infrastructure around water and sewer, could be the infrastructure around schools. Everyone knows in this state we need more housing. I believe we need more housing. But there's a lot of ways to do that don't involve administrative overreach. We should be using incentives. We should be incenting communities that want more housing to build multifamily. What we shouldn't be doing is using this stick approach that this administration does, which involves withholding critical money from towns like Marshfield for dredging the harbor, from Middleborough for suicide prevention training. Often grants to local fire departments are being withheld because they don't comply. I think that's completely inappropriate. The state owns 100,000 acres of vacant land in and around Boston. Governor Shortsleeve, day one, that's where I would start with development. You got plenty of land in places where the community would welcome housing. You can work with the vacant land. You can give it to developers. You can redevelop it. I did a lot of that back in 2015 and 16 when I was the T, and that's where we ought to be starting. Communities that want the housing, we ought to be using incentives, but we shouldn't be forcing small towns to absorb and build multifamily housing that they probably can't afford.
But what's your thoughts? I mean, I understand that it's the idea of the Communities Act is you're tying it to the commuter rail, those communities that are either next to the community, that the commuter rail goes through or adjacent. It's ideal because you're having people using public transportation. What would be the incentive for the other communities as part of the Commonwealth to also be a part of this?
Well, I'll give you an example. When I was running the T, we built thousands of units of multifamily condominiums in and around the Red Line in Quincy. In Quincy, they want multifamily. The mayor welcomed it. We had great developers we worked with. People were happy. They wanted the housing. And by the way, if you build housing right on top of a Red Line station, you can jump on the subway and get to work. You don't need a parking space. That's not the case in a lot of suburban communities. So let's start with the communities that want the housing. There are plenty of them. What I would not do is force small suburban towns that don't want the housing and probably can't manage that level of development to build condos.
You talked about the MBTA. Let's talk about transportation infrastructure. How important is it to the Shortsleeve administration, you're elected, to the MBTA? How has it been performing, as well as taking care of roads and bridges?
Sure. Well, the MBTA is a critical asset. About 400,000 people use the T every day. I think the most important thing we can do long term for the T is to look at the commuter rail. The commuter rail enables access into Boston from all sorts of parts of the state. Worcester County, Essex County, Bristol County, Norfolk County. There's a lot of parts of the state where housing is more affordable than it is right in the core of Boston that the commuter rail can enable access to. So I think one of the great opportunities is to run more frequent commuter rail service on smaller trains, 20 to 30 minute gaps between trains. With that level of service, I think you'd find a lot of people that could live an hour outside Boston and could ride the train in. So that's where I would focus when we think about long-term expansion of the T.
Let's give a comparison in regards to your administration compared to the current administration. We know that there's a little bit of friction between on the federal side of things with Donald Trump and our current administration. How advantageous would it be to have a Brian Shortsleeve in office and being able to work with our federal partners to be able to get federal dollars for transportation infrastructure and other projects?
I'm confident that a Governor Shortsleeve would have a seat at the table with this administration. I'm a businessman. I've spent my life building companies. I know how to get deals done. I know how to work with people. So my focus would be on making sure that we are at the table, the state of Massachusetts, to get the very best deal that we can for our state. What I see with Governor Healy is a career politician who grandstands, who goes on CNN, sticks her finger in the president's eye. By the way, Mayor Wu does the same thing in Boston. That's not helping Massachusetts, okay? That's not going to help Harvard. What would be helpful is leadership in this state that could, in a constructive way, work with the administration. Let me give you an example. In another state, Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of Michigan, she wants to get a deal for the Michigan auto industry. What is her approach? She goes to the White House twice. She invites the president to Michigan. They tour a facility. They're going to get a deal done, and it'll be the best deal for Michigan that she can get. That is a very different approach than we see here with Governor Healy, who is a career politician, grandstanding, I think thinking a lot more about playing to her national base than she is getting a good deal for Massachusetts. So I'm confident I have a seat at the table.
You talked about business. What do we need to do in the Commonwealth to help small businesses? I know that maybe you want to lure bigger companies here, but what about the small businesses? What about the middle class?
Well, look, small business is the backbone of American capitalism. It always has been. In this state, 60% of people work for small businesses. All of the growth in Massachusetts, when we're growing, is from small business. If you talk to small businesses, they will tell you that there's three things that matter right now in this state. Taxes are too high, utility bills are too high, and the regulatory burden is too high. We need to get really serious about those things because small businesses here are closing. More businesses closed in Massachusetts than opened last year. 500 people a week are leaving the state. And the burden on small business from taxes, utility bills, and the regulatory regime is too high. A governor can change that. Day one, Governor Shortsleeve would strip all of those state-mandated fees out of your utility bill. That would drop your bill in some cases by 50%. Day one, we would be investing and looking at nuclear power. Day one, we'd be looking at building that pipeline that could bring down power costs. Those are things the governor can do. On the regulatory side, a lot of regulatory action is in the executive branch. I talked to a developer in Quincy 2 weeks ago who told me that the governor's stretch code, which has a variety of green-related initiatives, added $20,000 of build cost per unit to a development he's doing. What he said is, look, I'm going to finish this one out, but I'm not going to build another project with that code in this state because it's too expensive. Those are things the governor can control. In day one, Governor Shortsleeve, we'd be cutting taxes, cutting fees, reducing that regulatory load, getting utility bills down so we can retain our young people and we can retain small businesses.
Massachusetts being a blue state, we've got definitely a political imbalance. How do you see yourself, if you're elected, being able to work with the Democratic leadership in the legislature to be able to get things done, get your initiatives across, and help the folks in the Commonwealth?
Well, Massachusetts, I believe, works better with balance. We have a tradition in this state of electing business-oriented Republican governors, going back to Paul Cellucci, Bill Weld, Mitt Romney, most recently Charlie Baker. The state was doing pretty well in a lot of those times. So I would tell you, I'm confident I can work with anybody. I can get to the table with anybody. I know if I was governor in the corner office, as a businessman who understands how to balance a budget, who lives in the real world, who understands how to control costs, I'd be sitting down with the legislature and I'd be saying, look, our number one focus right now needs to be getting costs down for hardworking families in this state. And I'm confident we can get something big done.
Of the Republican governors you mentioned, any of them that you favor their policies, that maybe your administration would model some of the policies and things that they've done?
I'll tell you this, every one of them had a much better record than Governor Maura Healey. I mean, this was the fastest growing state in all of the Northeast for most of the 2010 through early 2020 time frame. It's amazing to think as we sit here in 2025 that we literally have fewer private sector jobs than we did 3 years ago. Our population is declining. It doesn't have to be that way. It does not have to be that way. But what we see with Healey, who ran on the largest tax hike in state history, and at every step of the way, her instinct has been to increase spending and increase taxes. She's driving people and businesses out of the state. So what I would tell you is a business-oriented, Republican focused on improving the business climate, we can get a lot done. And I think there's tremendous opportunity. This is a great state. We have phenomenal assets, but we've got to get serious about the cost of living and the cost of doing business, or we're going to continue to see people walk out the door.
I thought the administration of Charlie Baker and Karen Polito did a great job. They were a great 1-2 punch, where a lot of times Karen would be working with a lot of the municipalities, depending on, again, we're a long way off from there, but depending on how things shake out, how do you see whoever you end up teaming up with, a lieutenant governor, going back to something where you're working with the municipalities and being able to assist them and having the lieutenant governor being more or less working with them to be able to help those communities like Karen did?
Well, it's so important to be out there, and Karen did an amazing job at that. We got 351 cities and towns, and a lot of the most important services that are delivered in this state are delivered at the local level. Schools, the police, the fire. So I think we got to push a lot of state resource and a lot of state spending back down to towns. They know how to solve problems. They know how to run schools. They understand public safety. And being out there, visiting all those towns, I would do that. I'm sure my lieutenant governor would do that. Even in the past month, we've visited more than 40 towns up and down the South Shore, Bristol County, Essex County. We're getting out there. And I think what I hear from people is they want change. And they love Massachusetts, but they believe we need a new direction.
What kind of change? Anything that they've zeroed in on? Or does everybody have a different ask that they're able to bend your ear?
You know, what I would tell you is behind every statistic you hear, there's a real human story. I was in Marshfield at the VFW on Monday night, and there was a woman there who was saying she has 4 grandchildren, and not a single one of them can afford to stay in Massachusetts. A few of them served in the Army, like your daughter. Thank you for her service.
Yes,
and they got out of the Army, and guess what? They're going to North Carolina. They're going to Texas. And she just said, look, like the young people in my family can't afford to stay here. So when I look at where we're at as a state, every time a company closes and a job disappears here, that's a family, that's a father, a mother, a grandfather that's losing their young people to another state. So I'd say the most common thing that comes up is affordability. And the energy bills, the electricity bills, look at that bill.
Yeah.
Half your bill now is unrelated to the cost of power. It is a set of state mandated fees, a fee for electric vehicles, a fee for renewable energy, a fee for solar. Those are programs that in total are adding close to $1,000 to everyone's bill. It's $1.5 billion a year. If the legislature wants to fund those programs, they should fund them, but they shouldn't be running through your bill. So day one, Governor Shortsleeve, we would eliminate all of those fees and we could cut bills, and that would make the state a lot more affordable for working families.
I think one other thing that is always on families' minds is the cost of an education, and that's kindergarten to grade 12. Every time I hear in regards to the funding that is given out, we know we're in the middle of the Student Opportunity Act that was passed several years ago, where it's supposed to equitably give out monies to each community. But the one thing I keep hearing about is the funding formula. And every time there's somebody who is in your position who's running for office, I ask, what needs to be done to better fund education in the Commonwealth for all 351 communities?
Well, it starts with increasing Chapter 70 and local aid. We talked about this explosion in state spending under Governor Healy. I mean, she's added $10 billion of annual spending. This year alone, $4 billion. How much of that is getting back to communities and local aid? Not much. If you look at most local aid budgets, most school support budgets, they're flat to up a little bit. So what I see is enormous spending up at the State House, up at Beacon Hill. It's not getting down to the district. So I think most importantly, we got to push a lot of that money down, which means getting state spending under control. Because I think local schools know what they need. I think local schools, if you give them the resources, they will do it. But Healy's not doing that. She's spending $1 billion on the migrant crisis. She's spending billions hiring lots more state employees. And the result of all those things is this enormous growth in state spending, but it's not getting down to your school. It's not getting down to your district. I would change that.
Veterans. Is enough done for our veterans here in Massachusetts? And if not, what can be done? Or are there programs that they're suitable but could do more?
I think taking care of our veterans is so important. There's a lot of people in this state that have come back from wars overseas. Some in fine shape, others with major health problems. I was a Marine. I saw it. I served overseas in Bosnia in the Persian Gulf. So for me, priority one will always be taking care of veterans. Where I would start is by putting homeless veterans at the top of the priority list for the shelter program. Full stop. That's where we would start, because I don't think we should be spending $1 billion a year providing shelter for migrant families from other countries when we can't even support homeless veterans on our own streets. So that's where I would start. And I think there's a lot of other great programs with veterans entrepreneurship, veterans education that I'm involved with, but it's about priorities. And my first priority, day one, would be to make sure that homeless veterans are first in line, not last in line, to get into those shelters.
Okay. How about the Brian Shortsleeve, who is not a candidate? What do you like outside of the campaign trail? What are some of the things you like to do, just so folks get a better idea of who you are?
Well, I got 3 little boys, as you said, not so little anymore. They're 13, 15, and 16, but they're great guys. I spend a ton of time with them. They love being out on the water. They love being out on boats. They love playing baseball. They love playing football. So I spend a ton of time with them. I also have a real passion when I'm not at work building companies or running for governor of helping veterans. So I do a lot with veterans entrepreneurship. I work with Mass Fallen Heroes in their veterans pitch contest every year, which is something I always really enjoy, seeing folks coming out of the service that want to start a business and helping them do it. But for me, for my wife and I, for Liz and I, our kids are always our first priority. And I want them to grow up and chase their dreams and build companies like I have. But I want them to do it here in Massachusetts. I don't want them to wake up when they're 22 and conclude that they've got to move to Austin, Texas, or Charlotte, North Carolina, or Miami, Florida, because that's where the opportunity is. So for me, family's always been first. And a big part of why I'm in this race is I want those 3 little guys to be here when they are my age, doing what I'm doing, as opposed to being down in somewhere in the Sun Belt, where too many of our young people are going right now.
I think we've touched upon a lot of topics during our conversation, and I thank you for being here. Is there something we haven't touched upon, but you feel you need to share with the viewers, or maybe reiterate something that we had just discussed earlier in our conversation?
This is an exciting race. We're getting a great response from volunteers, from donors. We're looking for folks to join the team. So please, for your viewers, go to brianshortsleeve.com municipal.com. Sign up to be a volunteer, sign up to join us at the convention, maybe make a donation. This is going to be a really exciting race, and we're looking for people that want to be part of this mission to join us.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it.
And again, we welcome you back as things progress in the race. If there's new details, we'd love to have you back. And we want to thank you for tuning into a program like this. The idea is to better inform you about some of the things that are going on in and around the community. And hopefully with this conversation, we've done that. Until the next time, have a great day.